The race for Nigeria's presidency heats up. Nigerian Information Minister Lai Mohammed responds to accusations from opponents that the government is using state institutions to interfere in Saturday's election. And Zimbabwe looks to water rationing as the country's water supply is threatened by wetland construction. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The countdown is on for Nigeria's election, set for February the 6th. 16th. Incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari and his rival Atiku Abubakar are set to battle it out for the top spot in Africa's most populous country. Saskia O'Donoghue has more.
As the Nigerian election draws ever closer, the campaign is hotting up. Current President Muhammadu Buhari and his APC party held a pivotal rally in the heart of Lagos on Saturday. The election is scheduled to take place on February 16th. It will pit Buhari against former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, who heads up the People's Democratic Party. The septuagenarian pair have run for president 9 times between them. There are more than 60 other candidates, although their chances of winning are close to none. The wealth and patronage networks of the two main parties drive the politics of Africa's top oil producer and most populous country. At Saturday's rally, Buhari told thousands of supporters he would continue to act upon his election promises from his 2015 victory. At that vote, he made 3 vows: to rid Nigeria of endemic corruption, fix the economy and tackle security threats. The government insists it's making progress, but the military's efforts to fight the Boko Haram Islamist insurgency and its Islamic State allied offshoot, now in its 10th year, are crumbling. The economy entered and climbed out of recession under Buhari, but the average Nigerian is still getting poorer. Opponents say his government is failing to tackle corruption, targeting only its enemies and ignoring allegations against his allies. And the government's activities have drawn international criticism too. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch say the army has been responsible for human rights abuses, including the massacre of protesters. The army says its use of force is justified.
Well, that was Reuters reporter Saskia O'Donoghue. Nigeria is not in crisis. That's the word from the country's information minister, Lai Mohammed. He was responding to accusations that the government is using state institutions, including police, security operatives and thugs, to intimidate and harass political opponents to prevent their supporters from voting on Saturday. VOA's Peter Clotis spoke with Minister Mohammed in Kwara State's capital, Ilorin.
I think whoever says that they are not secure in Nigeria today is being very dishonest. Now, I think the truth of the matter is that the opposition, having realized that they are going to lose this election, have now contrived to create an impression it's a crisis in the country. There's no crisis anymore. We are in Ilorin, Kwara State. And I think we are behind the last couple of hours. Do you see, a country in crisis, people go about their businesses? Yes, I have explained to you that we are fighting an international terror group. And we're not the only country in the world fighting terrorism. But really, there's no crisis in Nigeria.
Some of your leading members in the ruling All Progressive Congress have expressed concern about foreign interference. What would you consider as foreign interference? And are there any concerns that you can point to about some countries trying to bully Nigeria or perhaps interfere in who wins the elections?
You see, Peter, at the end of the day, all election is local. All policy is local. People of Nigeria will vote for the candidate on the premise of their choice. Now, what the opposition has done, and I think this is part of the strategy they adopted in their so-called Dubai summit, is to create the impression, one, that elections will not be free and fair. Discredit the entire process, target institutions such as INEC, and the Independent National Electoral Commission, and the police. I said they don't have confidence in them. But the truth of the matter is that they are trying to escalate and internationalize an issue or issues which are purely domestic.
Since I've been here, I've heard some criticism from your opponents that the government seem to want to use state institutions like security institutions and what they call thugs to intimidate and harass their opponent and prevent them from voting. Any assurances to the people of Nigeria that the government is not doing so?
I think, on the contrary, it is the opposition that wants to rely on thugs, hooligans, and they are very critical of the police because the police has also vowed to ensure there's a level playing field for everybody. Now, it's not why would the government use thugs if it has the effect of the police? No. The truth of the matter is that this government has said several times it will work towards creating a level playing field for everybody. Now, but they are jittery because all along before, they've already been winning elections using thugs where the security will move the other way. But this time around, they have at the end of affairs a principled leader who is asking security to ensure that all the parties have equal access, that voters are allowed to come to vote and votes should count.
Nigerian Information Minister Lai Mohammed speaking to VOA's Peter Clotin. Now, staying in Nigeria, this week we'll bring you a series of special reports about ordinary people in that country. They'll tell us what they expect from the upcoming elections and what their hopes are for their nation. In this first installment of We Are Nigerian, we hear from Patricia Onoja.
When I wake up in the morning, I bathe my children, pray, and take them to school. In this election season, I travel to villages for public education on why they should avoid violence, because violence is the major problem of every election. The issue of violence is worrisome, but as mothers, we can advise our children on the kind of friends to hang out with, and to be sure that they go out with friends who are properly brought up. The main problem with Boko Haram is children cannot go to school and elderly people also can't go to work. Women have to find something that at least they can do. When they wake up in the morning, we give them a chore to do, so they would not sit idle without doing anything. Even if they go to school, it will help. The government can help us and provide children in such situations with scholarships or anything that will encourage them to continue with their education. The truth is, there is a worrying situation in Nigeria. Fear of Boko Haram, kidnappers, and insecurity grips everyone, and people are living without peace of mind. Everyone is scared of what will happen tomorrow. Whether you are going to be attacked by thieves, no one knows. I would change the whole emphasis. I would find new hands of opportunity for younger people. I would aggressively start by tackling the security issues. Because if there is peace, people can go to their farms, office, or anywhere without fear. For example, if I don't have salt in my house, I can go to a neighbor's without fear of anything at any time of the day. My favorite president is someone who has sympathy for humanity, has gender development on his agenda, someone who will ensure women's lives are enhanced, because women are better managers. So the president should be someone who gives importance to women's development.
The 32nd African Union Summit of Heads of State kicked off on Sunday in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. The summit is discussing the pressing issues of the continent, including forced displacement, peace and security. The theme this year is refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons towards durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa. The two-day summit will also focus on reform inside the AU as well as the African Continental Free Trade Area. In his opening remarks, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mohamed, said forced displacement in Africa remains sadly remarkable. Speaking to reporters in Addis Ababa, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Africa is a continent of hope and opportunity despite its problems.
Many see Africa as a continent with problems. We see Africa as a continent of hope and opportunity. Of course, there are many problems in the African continent. There are many unsolved situations. There are many conflicts. We have, as it was said this morning, a very serious problem of refugees and displaced persons. But it is also true that is in Africa that we are now signals that conflicts can be resolved and that conflicts can be avoided.
At the opening of the summit, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi took over the rotating AU chairmanship from President Paul Kagame of Rwanda. Now, since November, tens of thousands of angry French have taken to the streets, first against a fuel tax hike and now over demands for better pay, fewer taxes, greater equality and citizens' participation in governing. More than 50,000 people were on the streets this weekend. How and when the protests will end is still in question. Lisa Bryant reports for VOA from Paris.
Another Saturday, another Yellow Vest demonstration. Week after week, the Gilets Jaunes, protesters named after the trademark yellow jackets French keep in their cars, brave the cold and riot police to come out in force across the country. It's not only weekends. Last Tuesday, Yellow Vests joined trade unionists in marches in Paris and elsewhere in France.
My demands are this, shared by all the Yellow Vests: lower taxes, restoring the wealth tax, to have real, independent justice that deals with social and environmental issues so people can live in dignity.
I think people just want to be heard by the government, and they want more justice.
Other Yellow Vests describe their movement as nothing less than a revolution over old grievances and newer reforms pushed by the government of President Emmanuel Macron.
We want the government to be fired, to have a new government, because this is not possible anymore. This is too much.
What's clear is the movement is resonating in Europe. It spread to Belgium, Bulgaria, Britain, and Greece, among other places. And it's getting the attention of Italy's populist government, increasing tensions between Paris and Rome. Here in France, President Macron says he's also listening and admits he is partly to blame for what he calls an insufficient government response to Yellow Vest frustrations. One short-term answer, a 3-month national debate to air French concerns on issues like taxes, public services, climate change, and democracy. Macron's popularity has inched up from record lows. But it's unclear where all this talk will lead. Possibly a referendum, but it's a risky move. It's also hard to reconcile the Yellow Vest's many and varied demands with Macron's reforms. The movement is leaderless and not always on the same page. Some Yellow Vest candidates are running for European Parliament elections in May on several different lists. Other Yellow Vests don't think they should be running at all.
To me, it doesn't make sense for the Yellow Vests to run on their own list.
I think it will be very hard for the Gilets Jaunes to translate their current success in French society into an electoral success.
So what is next for the Yellow Vests? That's hard to say, but they're certain to be on the streets again next Saturday. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Paris.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at viewer Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, will Zimbabwe need to resort to water rationing? We'll be right back.
Voices, we're talking about the news and issues you're talking about, sharing stories of development and growth across Africa, around the world, and in our lives. Topics that inform, empower, and change the rules. It's time for Our Voices with me, Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick,
and Hadiza Kiari,
and Ayan Bior,
and Orion Itangi Shaka.
It's time for Our Voices.
A months-old battle over U.S. border security comes to a climax this week as Washington faces a Friday deadline to avoid another partial government shutdown. Overshadowing congressional negotiations is President Donald Trump's vague but persistent threat to declare a national emergency if Congress fails to fund wall construction along the U.S.-Mexico border. VOA's Michael Bowman reports.
Where walls go up, illegal crossings go way, way down. I will get it built.
An unwavering president still at odds with an unwavering House Speaker.
There's not going to be any wall money in the legislation.
So far, no deal has been reached by a bipartisan bicameral conference committee tasked with finding a compromise on border security before Friday, when U.S. government funding expires once again. But President Trump holds a wild card, his authority as commander-in-chief to declare a national emergency and bypass Congress altogether.
And I don't think anybody questions his legal authority to declare a national emergency.
Democrats say an emergency declaration is unwarranted and unwise.
It's when the president interferes that there's a problem. So my advice to the president, you don't want to shut down the government. If you don't want to have to declare a national emergency, which I am opposed to and I don't think will happen, stay out of it.
Some powerful Republicans are also uneasy.
Because the national emergencies that have been issued in the past have not been contentious. I'm pretty sure that this one would be.
Trump is undeterred, tweeting, quote, "The wall will get built one way or another." In the abstract, the president's authority to declare a national emergency is not in question.
It turns out that the federal statute books are actually littered with hundreds of places where a president can declare national emergencies in various contexts.
But there is a catch. The situation must be sudden and dire.
A true crisis could be a natural disaster, could be a foreign invasion, something like that, where the need to act quickly was so important that the president would need these national emergency powers because there just wouldn't be enough time for Congress to convene.
Observers note that America's border security flaws have been debated for decades.
I think a lot of Americans look at this skeptically and say, what has changed between the beginning of the president's term and now that makes this such a dire emergency?
Trump is expected to explain his thinking later Monday when he visits the border city of El Paso, Texas. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
In recent years, Zimbabwe has been ravaged by drought and flash floods that authorities there have largely blamed on climate change. But conservationists say wetland construction and stream bank cultivation have worsened the problem, posing threats to water management. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
37-year-old laborer Zvai Muchishwe could not find a place in the city 3 years ago, so he rushed to build a home on a wetland.
We are waiting for authorities to tell us if this is going to be our permanent building. We quickly built with cheap material as we might have to move. That is why some of the structures are cracking. It is because there is lots of water underground.
Conservation groups warn that wetland construction and stream bank cultivation are a threat to water supplies, including the cities. Harare Wetlands Trust says wetland construction blocks the natural release of underground water, while a diversity of crops is needed to keep water in the ground.
If you don't have this and you've got monoculture, all you get is runoff, and you've lost the opportunity for the water to get into the ground, which has been so carefully laid out by nature. It's not there by mistake, and we're discarding it for one plant or buildings, when that is the way we get our water. You can't make water come any other way.
Zimbabwe's environmental agency says it is trying to minimize damage to wetlands and stream banks.
We must not be selfish when it comes to the environment. The environment is for us all, and it must save us, and hence we are urging anyone who would want to do any form of construction to ascertain the nature as well as the status of the piece of land where they want to undertake the development.
In the meantime, Harare's frequent water shortages are getting worse. City authorities say for the first time they will soon start water rationing. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare.
A special airlift for thousands of baby flamingos is underway in South Africa as drought puts their breeding ground in peril. VOA's Mariama Diallo reports a warning. Some of the images in her report may be disturbing.
A reservoir that hosts one of Southern Africa's largest flamingo populations is drying up. The site is littered with the bodies of hundreds of dead chicks. A rescue operation is being organized by local groups along with environmental authorities.
We need to put the effort into the strong ones. They are the most important ones, as we need to transport them as well.
The heat is causing the flamingo eggs to lose their moist protective cover. And with their inner membranes hardening, it's difficult for chicks to peck their way out. Many of the exhausted birds that emerge don't survive long.
Our day starts now at 4. We started with the feeding. It lasts out about an hour. In between, we need to monitor all the birds. We need to prepare the food. We need to make sure everything is clean. The birds are still safe.
Unfortunately, the future doesn't look bright, says South Africa's Department of Environment.
Our biggest worry is that if we don't get the rainfall this week, the mothers who are sitting with their chicks may abandon the chicks and fly over somewhere. And if that happens, we'll have more than 3,000 chicks to deal with, and that could be a disaster.
Local diamond mines paid for an emergency flight to carry the first batch of 900 chicks to Pretoria, some 550 kilometers away. They landed in Mike Bolhuis's home. He turned his private residence into a temporary makeshift facility. He says returning the chicks to the wild presents several challenges.
The big problem and the second phase challenge is once they can eat themselves is to try and not have a further human imprintation on them. The human imprint is the biggest problem if you want to later reintegrate these birds into flamingo flocks or colonies.
Finding the just right spot will also be critical.
Once they are juveniles and they can eat themselves, you can put them at those dams, but there must be the correct mud and ground so they can make the nests.
Rescue organizers say chicks would likely spend 3 or 4 months rehabilitating at various sites before they are released back into the wild. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
Now, ask anyone who's tried to break into the Hollywood film industry, and they'll tell you it's not easy. It's even harder if you are a woman and a Muslim. One filmmaker found success both in Hollywood and in our own community. VOA's Elizabeth Lee reports from Los Angeles.
One look at movie director and writer Lena Khan, and it's obvious she doesn't fit the Hollywood director stereotype.
it's very hard to be a female filmmaker in Hollywood, that is for sure. I think they feel like you don't have as much authority, or you can't command a set as much, or it does seem like they won't give you a chance or a risk quite as much. And for the Muslim thing, I just think they are still trying to process that.
Khan is a child of immigrants from India. In school, she explored several career options before deciding on filmmaking, a choice that sparked some criticism in her South Asian community.
When I was starting out, like, people in the community, South Asian as well, most of all, they were like, why are you entering such a stupid career?
She persisted, fighting to get funding for a film called Tiger Hunter.
How many people actually live here? 11, maybe 13.
Released in 2017, it's a comedy about the immigrant experience of a man from India in the U.S. Khan says the success of this movie surprised people in her community.
People who are South Asian or Muslim can't seem to believe that our stories have any real value. And so the moment you start talking about, oh, you know, such and such person from this company, aka white person, said this movie is good, that's when their eyebrows raise. And that's when they feel like, oh, okay, somebody else validated this brown person's story, and thus it has something to say.
Khan says the film's universal themes and the coincidental timing of its release helped make it a success.
And the Muslim ban happened right when the movie came out, you know, and that was never intended. It's not a good thing, but it became very, very relevant.
Tiger Hunter launched Khan's career. Khan says she will continue to navigate through Hollywood on her own terms and pursue her passion in writing and directing.
I like what I'm doing. I mean, I like it. I feel like it has some value. It's incredibly fun. And then I'm also a faithful person where it's always, for me, it's about sort of like how you went about your day and kind of what you tried, and the results are up to God.
Khan is now working on a TV comedy and directing a movie for Disney. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Los Angeles.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. There were bold styles on the Grammy Awards red carpet on Sunday, and stars of the music world, including Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, and Miley Cyrus, paused for photographs. Katy B turned out in a flower-shaped dress which she found difficult to walk in. Katy Perry also went for a shaped pink dress which bulged around the hips. White and silver dominated the red carpet. Lady Gaga, Dua Lipa, Jennifer Lopez, Heidi Klum, and Meghan Trainor all opted for the color blend. And in other fashion news, when Ukrainian designer Maria Sorokina realized that one family of two people generates a lot of solid domestic waste, plastic wrapping, glass and paper wrapping, an idea was born. She sees waste not as actual garbage, but recyclable materials that can be used to create fashionable accessories, a glamorous way to go green. And that's what's trending. That's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.